Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome back to Favourites Week. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favourite short story collections. So I found this list a little bit harder to come up with than my list of my top 10 favourite classic novels and my top 10 favourite modern novels, because I just haven't read as many short story collections as I have novels, and while there are a lot of short story collections that I've read and loved, I also think I haven't read as many short story collections in the last sort of year than I had before. So some of the short story collections which 2 years ago I might have said were my favourites, I don't actually remember as well now, but there are some amazing short story collections that I have loved that I want to talk to you about today, so let's get into them. At number 10 I have Asleep by Banani Yoshimoto. There are 3 short stories in here, all of which are translated from the Japanese and all of which look at the theme of sleep in different ways. I love Banani Yoshimoto's writing. She writes fantastically and these stories are so interesting, so wonderfully done, and I just love the way Banani Yoshimoto writes. So Asleep is a short story collection I would definitely recommend. At number 9 I have This Isn't the Sort of Thing That Happens to Someone Like You by John McGregor. This is a great short story collection that I really like. Some stories more than others. John McGregor is one of my favourite writers. I think he writes beautifully, and I think his writing works really well for short stories because it's very lyrical and very impactful as well. My favourite story in this collection is actually the first story, That Colour, which is really short and just beautiful, but there are so many other stories I loved in this, and so many that have really stayed with me. John McGregor writes really powerfully about landscape and about the effect of landscape on the people within it, and there are so many powerful stories in here which look at people kind of existing within a landscape and what it means to exist within a landscape and within a place. I love this short story collection a lot and I would highly recommend it. At number 8 I have The Snow Garden by Rachel Joyce. The Snow Garden is a really lovely Christmas short story collection which Rachel Joyce released. She is the author of The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry and other books which I liked very much, but not as much as I loved The Snow Garden, which is just a lovely little short story collection of interconnected short stories all set in the run-up to and just after Christmas, often looking at kind of like complex family situations and how these families deal with Christmas and what it means to be part of a family or part of a group of people or not part of a group of people at Christmas time. I feel like Rachel Joyce is one of those writers who writes brilliantly poignant stories where often her stories will be very like moving and powerful and a little bit sad, but with a little bit of hope in too, in a really nice way. Like I said, these short stories are interconnected, so a few people like crop up in other people's stories or are mentioned in other people's stories, which is something I love in a short story collection. There are a few of them in here, so that's another thing that I really like about it. At number 7 I have In the Country by Mia Alvar. This is a fantastic short story collection by an author from the Philippines, and this short story collection, some of them are set in the Philippines, and the ones that are not set in the Philippines typically follow characters from the Philippines living and working abroad. So it looks really interestingly at what it means to be from the Philippines and what it means to be from the Philippines not in the Philippines, or what it means to have come back to the Philippines. Like there's a lot about the Philippines kind of place in the world and a lot about how these characters kind of feel in relationship to the place that they are from and the history of the place that they are from. There's so many things I love in this short story collection. I think it's really beautifully written and so fantastic, like such a underrated short story collection as well. I haven't heard that many people talk about it, but it was recommended to me by Weena Wonders. I'll link her channel down below because she's fantastic, and there are just the stories in here are just incredible and so powerfully done and really fantastic. At number 6 I have The Not Dead and the Saved by Kate Clancy. I would really like to reread this collection because I don't remember the individual stories that well, but I do remember very well the impact it had on me and the impression it left on me. Kate Clancy is a fantastic writer. I have loved Meeting the English, which is her novel. I don't know if she's had another novel out since then, but that novel I adored, and I also love her poetry. She's an incredibly talented person, and The Not Dead and the Saved is a wonderful short story collection. Very powerful, beautifully written, and it really interestingly explores the kind of theme of motherhood and parenthood in general, and kind of parent-child relationships, both like biological parent-child relationships and like surrogate parent-child relationships. And there are so many stories in here which just explore that so well and so beautifully that I just love it a lot. It's such a good read. At number 5 I have Revenge by Yoko Agawa. This is another Japanese short story collection and this is really fantastic. This is another a series of interconnected short stories, which, as I said, is something that I really love. And these stories are a real mix. Some of them are quite violent, more violent than my typical read. When you read like the first 2 stories, you're like, oh, the title Revenge is a bit weird. And then you get further and further into the stories and you start to understand much more. I love how all the stories are interlinked and how different people crop up in other people's stories or read about other people's stories, like in the newspaper. That's really, really fun. And there are so many really powerful stories in here that have really stayed with me. I think it's such a fantastic collection. Yoko Agawa just writes so amazingly as well. Like, I just love her writing style. It's so, yeah, it's just so weird but perfect, like, and the perfect blend of like realism and absurdity. I think this is fantastic and I would highly recommend it. At number 4, I have Last Fling by Suji. I love Last Fling a lot. Suji is a great writer. She is one of the few contemporary writers that I read as a teenager growing up, and then I kind of rediscovered her last year when I read Last Fling. There are so many short stories in here that are absolutely beautiful. The title story, Last Fling, is probably my favourite and like made me cry a lot and really, really emotionally impacted me, and I really, really connected with it on an emotional level. And there are so many stories in here to connect with on an emotional level. So many truly powerful, amazing stories about family, about hope and people getting together, about art and loss and grief, and getting older. There's a lot of stories in here about, there are quite a few stories in here about getting older and how that changes. There's one story which, one of the few times I've done this while reading a short story collection, I finished the story and I immediately went back and read it from the beginning. It's about a couple, both of whom are artists, and one of whom is losing their sight, and what it means to lose your sight when art and the creation of visual art is so important to you. Like, it's just beautiful and so powerful, and I would highly, highly recommend it. Now, the final 3 are all joint favourites. I can't really pick between these 3 books, and I've referred to all 3 of them at different times as my favourite short story collection. Literally, like, just in the last minute since I spoke the last sentence of this video, I've gone to my computer and like reordered my notes to change the order that these are in, and in another 10 minutes I would probably put them in a different order. But at number 3, I'm going to put Emerald City by Jennifer Egan. I love this short story collection. I really must reread it sometime because it's not very long and there are some fantastic, truly amazing stories in here. I love how Jennifer Egan writes. I think, like Emily St. John Mandel, she has a real clarity to her writing. Her writing is engaging and dramatic and powerful. It's intelligent and beautiful, but it's never like gets in the way of the story. And all of these short stories tell such fantastic emotional stories with such rich, powerful characters. I just absolutely love them. My favourite short story in here is called One Piece, which is a story about grief in many ways, and it's just incredible. And I love this short story collection a lot. Maybe this should go higher, I don't know. It's fantastic. I really, really need to reread it sometime soon. Then at number 2, I have Smoked Meat by Rowena McDonald. This is an amazing short story collection, and again, it's an interconnected one, which I always enjoy. These short stories are set in Montreal and follow various characters, many of whom crop up in each other's stories, and a lot of them work in cafes or in bars or are artists or artist models. That's like how a lot of them know each other. But there are some truly amazing stories in here. We visit a lot of different characters in a lot of different situations and learn what it means for all of them to kind of be in this place. It has such a strong sense of setting. Like, this book made me want to visit Montreal so much. And also the stories and the kind of stories that Rowena McDonald is telling are so powerful and so beautiful. Like, there's so many amazing short stories in here that I love so much. I think my favourite one, maybe, like, I was going to tell you what my favourite story was, and then I started looking down the list and I was like, I love all of these. How can I pick a favourite one? Learning Butterfly is a truly amazing story, as is Down to Rue Baudry. I'm not saying that right. Which is just a beautiful, beautiful story. There's just so many stories in here that are so powerful and so amazing. I want to reread this as well, actually. I really should. Oh, it's so good. It's so good and very underrated. I would highly, highly recommend this. Now at number 1, I'm going to put Kitchen by Minami Yoshimoto, but I feel a bit weird about having this as my favourite short story collection because there are only 2 stories in here. But I do love both of the stories a lot, and I do think it works really well as a little mini collection. So I do think it probably does belong at number 1 here, but just to say, only 2 stories in here. The first one is Kitchen, which follows the story of a young woman who, after the death of her grandmother, her parents are no longer around either, moves in with a friend of hers and his mother, who is a transgender woman. The book looks at gender and grief and love and food. Like, the way this book looks at food is just amazing. Like, so amazing. And then the second story in this, Moonlight Shadow, follows a woman whose boyfriend of 4 years has recently died, and in the same car crash that he died, his brother's girlfriend also died. So her and her boyfriend's brother kind of bond in their shared grief, and it looks at kind of her trying to move on from this, her coping with her grief and her loss, and it's just so powerful and I love it a lot. Like both the stories in here, the way Banana Yoshimoto writes about food and grief is just unbeatable. This short story collection is fantastic. I would highly, highly recommend it. And there we have it. Those are my 10 favourite short story collections. Please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these and what you thought of them. And also, what's your favourite short story collection? I would love to know. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow with the next instalment of Favourites Week.